Picture this. You're walking through the most famous house in rock and roll history, and right above your head is a room that's been sealed since the day Elvis passed away. What could possibly be so important, so personal, that it stayed locked away for half a century? For nearly 5 decades, Graceland sat frozen in time, honoring Elvis Presley, the guy who went from dirt poor to the king of rock and roll. I mean, we're talking about a kid born in a tiny 2-room house his dad built for $180 in Tupelo, Mississippi. Millions of people walked through those halls, gawked at his rhinestone jumpsuits, and left flowers by his grave. But way up above them, behind a locked door, one part of the mansion stayed completely untouched, sealed like some kind of time capsule nobody dared crack open. Now here's where it gets wild. In 2025, that attic door finally got unlocked, and what they discovered? It left even the pros shaken. We're not just talking about some old recordings or forgotten fan mail here. This was something way more personal, something deeply human. The real question isn't just what they found in that attic. It's who he was the day the music stopped. August 16th, 1977. Elvis Presley was found unconscious in his private bathroom at Graceland, the very place he'd called his sanctuary. This was the same guy who'd been born just 35 minutes after his identical twin brother Jesse passed away at birth. Maybe he was finally joining the brother who'd haunted him his whole life. They rushed him to the hospital, but hours later, the unthinkable became official. The king of rock and roll was gone at just 42. The doctors said it was cardiac arrhythmia. Basically, his heart just stopped. But fans and experts, they weren't buying it. Something felt seriously off. When the autopsy team dug deeper, they found clear signs of long-term prescription substance use. But then Dr. Jerry Francisco, the county medical examiner, stepped up and dropped this bombshell. Prescription pills had absolutely nothing to do with Elvis's passing. The medical community was floored. Most people figured he was trying to protect Elvis's reputation, but you can't bury the truth forever. When that toxicology report finally came out, it painted this really disturbing picture. Elvis's system was loaded with heavy-duty stuff: Dilaudid, Quaaludes, Percodan, Demerol, codeine, all at serious levels. Fans were absolutely horrified. How did it get this bad? Who let this happen? How deep did this cover-up go? And if whatever he was taking was involved, what exactly had them so spooked about people poking around in that attic right above his room? Meet Dr. Nick, the guy who wrote 19,000 prescriptions. Enter Dr. George Nichopoulos. Everyone called him Dr. Nick. Get this. Between 1975 and 1977, prosecutors claimed he wrote prescriptions for Elvis totaling over 19,000 doses of powerful medications. That's in just 31 months. In 1977 alone, we're talking more than 10,000 doses of stimulants, sedatives, and narcotics, painkillers, downers, uppers. His name was on all of it. When they questioned him, Dr. Nick didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he said he was practicing something called harm reduction. His argument? Elvis was already hooked bad, and the only way to keep him away from dangerous illegal substances was by controlling his supply through legal channels. Crazy thing is, a jury actually believed him. They cleared him of any criminal responsibility in Elvis's passing back in 1981. But the story wasn't over. By 1980, he was in hot water again. Not just for Elvis, but for overprescribing to other celebrities like Jerry Lee Lewis. Finally, in 1995, the Tennessee Medical Board had enough. They yanked his license permanently, saying he had a dangerous pattern of overprescribing. Then came this interesting twist. In 2020, author Sally A. Hodel dropped a book called Elvis Destined to Die Young. Her take? Elvis's passing wasn't about addiction at all. She argued it was a bunch of genetic heart conditions and chronic health issues that mixed badly with his prescriptions. According to her research, Elvis had problems in 9 out of 11 body systems, including this genetic condition called alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency that attacks your lungs and liver. Her point? Elvis wasn't destroying himself. He was trying to survive, managing unbearable pain the only way he knew how. If that's true, if we've been getting his substance use wrong for decades, then what did the Presley family really know about his condition? And what exactly were they hiding in that attic for nearly half a century? Something so personal, so revealing, it couldn't be shared with the world until now. The funeral that broke Memphis, and why they moved his body. The day after Elvis passed away, grief hit Memphis like a tsunami. Nearly 100,000 fans swarmed Graceland's gates, desperate for one last look at the king. There he was, dressed in a white suit and blue shirt, lying in state for public viewing. That image burned itself into everyone's hearts who saw it. On August 18th, 1977, the funeral procession started rolling. 17 gleaming white Cadillacs cruised through the city, a royal escort worthy of rock and roll royalty. The mourners read like a who's who list: James Brown, Sammy Davis Jr., Caroline Kennedy, and of course, Priscilla, Lisa Marie, and Vernon Presley. They laid Elvis to rest next to his beloved mother Gladys at Forest Hill Cemetery. She was the woman he called my best girl, and when she passed away on August 14th, 1958, at just 46, it left Elvis completely shattered. He never really got over losing her, but the peace didn't last long. Less than 3 weeks later, on August 29th, something absolutely bizarre happened that shook the whole Presley family. 3 guys tried to steal Elvis's coffin in this totally botched scheme. They failed miserably and got charged with attempted grave robbery, body snatching, and trespassing. Vernon Presley got spooked about another attempt, so he made this bold move. He quietly had Elvis and Gladys reburied at Graceland, right inside the meditation garden that Elvis himself had created. The estate basically went into fortress mode. Doors got locked, rooms got sealed, and one area in particular, the attic, got locked up tight and never opened again. But here's what I don't get. A grave robbery explains why you'd beef up security around the burial sites. But why seal off the attic that's nowhere near the graves? What could possibly be hidden up there that needed decades of silence? How a poor kid built his dream house. Back in 1957, this 22-year-old Elvis Presley, already becoming a superstar, bought this gorgeous mansion on the outskirts of Memphis. Cost him $102,500, which is almost $1 million in today's money. For a kid who grew up so poor, his family sometimes had to rely on neighbors for food. Owning a place like this must have felt like pure fantasy. The house already had a name, though: Graceland. Elvis didn't try to change it. He just embraced it. It became his sanctuary, his palace, his playground. This place had everything: sprawling barns, stables, pastures with horses, and get this, a pet chimpanzee named Scatter. Elvis would actually dress him up in clothes and pull these elaborate pranks that made visitors wonder who was really running the show. In 1964, Elvis created what became one of the most peaceful spots on the property: the meditation garden. Flowers, fountains, white columns. He'd sit out there for hours, just thinking about life, and probably the crazy pressure of being the king. Despite all that explosive stage energy, Elvis was actually pretty shy and introverted when cameras weren't rolling. He'd duck his chin and look down when meeting new people. The guy found peace in reading spiritual and philosophical books, building this huge library filled with works on Taoism, mysticism, metaphysics. That quiet garden would eventually become his final resting place. But it wasn't just the garden that carried mystery. After Elvis passed away in 1977, the entire second floor of Graceland, his personal quarters, including that bathroom where they found him, got permanently sealed off. Even when Graceland opened to the public in 1982, upstairs was totally off limits. Not even presidents or world leaders got to go up there. And even more hidden than the second floor was what sat directly above it, the attic. No photos, no mentions, just complete silence. What was it about that attic that made even the Presley family act like it didn't exist? And why, after all these decades, is it only being opened now? The year someone almost stole Graceland. In 2024, something happened that sent shockwaves through Elvis's fan base and all of Memphis. This mysterious company called Nasani Investments and Private Lending LLC tried to auction off Graceland, claiming that Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter and heir, had defaulted on some loan. I mean, can you imagine? The most iconic home in American music history almost falling into some random private hands? Riley, who's now the trustee of the Promenade Trust that owns Graceland, jumped into action fast. She filed this lawsuit calling the whole thing fraudulent, forged documents, schemes to exploit her family's legacy. The works. The drama all came down to this last-minute courtroom battle. Just one day before the scheduled auction, a Tennessee judge stepped in and blocked the whole sale. In his ruling, he called Graceland a one-of-a-kind cultural asset and said losing it would cause irreparable harm to the public. Here's the weird part, though. Nobody from Riley's legal team or Nasani even showed up in court. The ruling just stood there, unchallenged, and Graceland stayed safe. But the whole thing left this unsettling question hanging. What if that court hadn't stepped in? What if some private investor had gotten control of Elvis's most sacred space? Would they have stormed that attic, cracked open its secrets, and exposed something the Presley family kept hidden for good reason? The room that was sealed for 50 years. So here we are in 2025, and after nearly half a century of silence, the archivists at Graceland finally unlocked that attic door. There was no big press conference, no grand announcement, just this quiet moment as they stepped into a room that had been sealed since the day Elvis passed away in 1977. What they found was absolutely mind-blowing. The walls were lined with boxes covered in decades of dust, personal stuff frozen in time, handwritten lyrics scribbled on napkins, and torn notebook pages, unreleased photos capturing intimate moments the world had never seen. Private letters, some romantic, others heartbreaking, and piles of unopened fan mail still waiting to be read. Early concert posters, rare stage outfits, even some of Elvis's childhood toys, little pieces of the boy who became a king. One leather jacket really stood out. Tucked inside the pocket was this small handwritten note that said, "Wear this when you need to disappear." Talk about eerie and personal. It hinted at a guy who maybe wanted to vanish from the spotlight sometimes. But that wasn't even the most chilling part, because what the archivists uncovered next didn't just belong in a museum. It had the potential to completely rewrite everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley and his final days. Recordings that nobody knew existed. The recordings no one knew existed. Among all those dust-covered treasures, the archivists found this single, unassuming box labeled in fading ink, Practice Sessions 1976. Inside were reel-to-reel tapes that hadn't been touched or heard in nearly 50 years. What they contained left the whole room completely silent. These weren't commercial recordings or polished studio takes. They were raw, intimate rehearsals. Elvis alone, just experimenting freely with gospel hymns, soulful blues riffs, and even early synthesizer sounds that hinted at a musical direction he never lived to explore. But one tape stood out above all the rest. On it, Elvis performed this stripped-down, deeply haunting version of Unchained Melody. No instruments, no background vocals, just his voice, cracking, trembling, aching with emotion. It was recorded just months before he passed. This wasn't just music. It was like a confession wrapped in melody, a farewell soaked in heartbreak. And that was only one box. Other boxes had stacks of unopened fan mail preserved in their original envelopes. Letters from soldiers serving overseas, grieving families, young musicians, lifelong fans. One letter really stood out. A plea from fans in 1976, begging him to cancel his tour for the sake of his health. But did he ever see it? Or was it just tossed into the attic? Lost in time, like all the warning signs nobody paid attention to? The items that showed who he really was, tucked between sequined stage outfits and old recording equipment, were artifacts that weren't meant for museum display cases. They were meant for memory. Quiet, powerful traces of the boy who existed before the king took over. There was this worn-out teddy bear from his early days in Tupelo, a Bible his mother Gladys had given him, with pages that were obviously well thumbed and bookmarked with love. His high school yearbook filled with handwritten messages, silly doodles, and signatures from classmates who knew him before fame swallowed his name whole. These weren't just possessions. They were personal keepsakes he saved not for fans, but for himself. Lisa Marie Presley once said, "It's comforting. I can come here any time and rummage through the boxes." That simple comment revealed so much. The attic wasn't just storage space. It was sacred ground where the Father, Son, and man behind the icon still lived quietly in old paper and fabric. And looking through those boxes, something really strange happens. The legend of Elvis, the hip swiveling megastar, just fades into the background. In his place stands someone more fragile, more complicated, more real. But now that we've seen the man behind the myth, will the world ever look at Elvis the same way again? The conspiracy theories that won't go away. From the moment Elvis passed away in 1977, the world just couldn't accept it, and conspiracy theories exploded overnight. Some people swore they saw him the very next day at Memphis International Airport, using the alias John Burroughs, a fake name Elvis had reportedly used before. Others claimed they spotted him ordering food at a Burger King in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Then came this book called Orion, a novel that eerily mirrored Elvis's life but ended with a faked passing. Claims started spreading that Presley had gone underground to escape fame. Soon after, these strange recordings surfaced, a voice that sounded like Elvis speaking from hiding, singing, explaining his disappearance. Most got quickly debunked as impersonators or hoaxes, but the belief just couldn't let it go, even into the 2000s and 2010s. One of the most viral theories insists Elvis is living quietly as a preacher named Bob Joyce, despite obvious age and appearance differences. For many folks, thinking Elvis orchestrated some elaborate exit is more comforting than the harsh reality that even legends can fall that hard, that fast. Now with the attic finally opened, some fans feel like they're getting closure. The artifacts, letters, tapes, they offer this final, raw connection to the man they lost. But for others, these discoveries just deepen the mystery. Because if something that intimate and personal was hidden for nearly 50 years, what else might still be waiting out there in the shadows of Elvis's unfinished story? The man who gave away 200 cars and changed everything. Elvis Presley isn't just a musician, he's a cultural symbol. Behind those rhinestone jumpsuits and hip swiveling performances was a man who never forgot where he came from. Throughout his life, he gave away more than 200 cars to friends, family, and complete strangers. On July 25, 1975, he bought a white and gold Cadillac for $11,500 and gave it to Minnie Pearson, a woman he'd never even met. In December 1976, he spent $140,000 in a single day buying 14 Cadillacs for friends, family, and even a stranger he ran into at the dealership. Elvis was also this pioneer who broke down racial barriers in music during the segregated 1950s. At first, polite society hated him for performing what they called race music. But here's the wild part. He ended up being the man who basically helped white audiences finally get into and actually appreciate black musical traditions. Pretty crazy how that worked out, right? He stayed surrounded by his loyal Memphis mafia, friends, bodyguards, and cousins who formed his protective inner circle. Tragically, Elvis was also the victim of systematic financial exploitation by his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who took up to 50% of his earnings instead of the usual 10%. Parker kept Elvis trapped in America because of his own immigration issues and gambling debts that eventually hit around $30 million. The RIAA has certified Elvis for over 146.5 million album sales, with worldwide estimates ranging from 500 million to over 1 billion records. He starred in Hollywood films, wore the crown of rock and roll, and carried all that weight. In 2018, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But here we are in 2025, and we're still learning who he really was through old fan letters, forgotten tapes, a worn teddy bear, and an attic that held more than just belongings. It held the soul of a man the world never stopped loving. Maybe that's because beneath the legend was this deeply human story of a poor boy who lost his twin brother adored his mother, struggled with genetic health conditions, and used his success to lift others up, even as his own life spiraled toward tragedy. You know what gets me every time? It's those little personal items. That teddy bear, his mom's Bible, those handwritten notes. That's the real Elvis right there, not the guy in the rhinestone jumpsuit. And honestly, I think there are probably dozens more stories like this just waiting to be told about all our favorite stars from the Golden Age. If you want to keep going down these rabbit holes with me, smash that subscribe button. Seriously, we're just getting started here. I've got stories about Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra, James Dean, all the icons who left way too soon. What do you think? Should Graceland release more of what they found, or is some stuff better left private? Let me know in the comments.